The first truck came on a Tuesday morning in April of 1976. Lauren DeMuth was in the equipment shed when he heard it. The low diesel groan of something heavy coming slow up County Road F. Then the hiss of air brakes just past his driveway. He came out of the shed in time to see the tailgate of a gravel truck lifting on the far side of his fence line. The load came down in a gray cascade. Crushed limestone, pea-sized, 10 tons of it, pouring onto the corner of his south field. He was 44 years old, had been farming the same 180 acres in Fillmore County, Nebraska, since 1958. The corner of the south field where the load landed was the best ground on the property. Dark, loamy soil that held moisture and gave it back slowly. His father had called it the sugar corner. Sweet soil, good tilth, no clay hardpan beneath it. Lauren had been growing sugar beets in that corner since 1962. 14 years of beet ground, broken each spring, fertilized lightly because the soil didn't need much, producing between 19 and 23 tons per acre depending on the season. The load covered roughly 30 by 40 feet of it, a foot deep in the center, tapering at the edges. The property on the other side of the fence belonged to a man named Harlan Pisk. Harlan ran a gravel contracting operation out of Geneva, hauled road material for the county and for private customers throughout the region. He also, apparently, used the field corner across from Lauren's fence as a staging area for overflow material. He had done it before, years earlier, with a smaller load, in a corner Lauren didn't use. Lauren had spoken to him about it then. Harlan had moved the material within the week, and Lauren had considered the matter settled. This was not a corner Lauren didn't use. He walked to the fence. The driver was already gone. The truck had come in, dropped the load, and left before Lauren had gotten his boots on. The gravel sat steaming faintly in the April morning air, pale gray against the dark soil around it. He walked the fence line to the road and back. The load had come down entirely on his side of the fence. The wire was intact. Harlan had not technically crossed onto Lauren's property to dump it. The truck had pulled to the road shoulder and released the load at an angle, letting the material carry itself across the fence line. He went back to the shed and called Harlan's office from the phone on the wall. Harlan's wife answered. Said Harlan was out on a job. Said she'd have him call back. Harlan did not call back that day. He called the following Thursday, 5 days after the load had landed. He said he was sorry for the inconvenience. He said the staging area at his Geneva yard was full up and he'd needed temporary overflow storage. He said he'd have it moved by summer. He said temporary. Lauren wrote the word temporary on the notepad next to the phone. Circled it. Asked what summer meant exactly. Harlan said he'd get to it when he could. By June, the beet ground under the gravel was lost for the season. The planting window had closed. Lauren had put beets in around the load, working the field to within 10 feet of the gravel edge. But the 30 by 40 foot section itself sat buried. Good beet ground, producing nothing, covered under a foot of crushed limestone he hadn't asked for and couldn't move alone. The county attorney's office in Geneva was a one-man operation run by a lawyer named Gerald Foss. Lauren went to see him in the second week of June. He brought the notepad with the word temporary circled, a photograph he'd taken of the load the day after it arrived, and a copy of his 1975 property survey showing the fence line and its relationship to the county road easement. Gerald looked at everything carefully. He said the situation was clear in principle. Harlan had deposited material on Lauren's land without permission, and Lauren was owed remedy. He said the complication was that Harlan hadn't crossed the fence with equipment. The material had been cast across from the road shoulder, and the county road easement ran 8 feet beyond the fence line, which put the origination point on public ground. He said it was arguable. He said a letter from his office would cost Lauren $80 and might prompt Harlan to move the gravel. Or might not. He said if Harlan didn't respond to the letter, a civil action would cost several $100s more and would take the better part of a year to resolve, at which point the beet season would already be lost regardless. He said Lauren's choice. Lauren thanked him and drove home without ordering the letter. He sat on the porch that evening and looked at the south field from the house. He could see the pale gray mound from there. Against the dark green of the growing beets on either side, it stood out like a bad tooth. He'd lost at least a third of an acre of production for the year. The 30 by 40 foot section was 200 square feet, just under 3/100ths of an acre. At 21 tons per acre average yield and a beet price of $26.40 per ton that season, the lost ground represented roughly $16 in direct lost revenue. Not catastrophic. But the ground was his and the gravel was not, and the principle of the thing sat in him all summer like a stone of its own. He called Harlan again in August. Harlan said he hadn't forgotten. Said fall, probably. Said the yard had opened up some. Fall came and went. The gravel did not move. He called again in November. No answer. He called in December. Harlan's wife said Harlan was out. He left his name. No return call. In March of 1977, Lauren drove to Harlan's office in Geneva in person. He sat in the waiting room for 25 minutes before Harlan came out. Harlan shook his hand. Offered coffee. Said he hadn't forgotten. Said spring for certain. Said the material was actually doing Lauren a favor by keeping that corner from eroding over the winter. Lauren drove home. He had now lost 2 beet seasons on that ground. The 1977 planting window was 6 weeks away. Harlan had said spring. Harlan had said summer. Harlan had said fall. Harlan said whatever seemed easiest to say in the moment. And the gravel was still there. He walked the south field on a cold morning in the first week of April and stood at the edge of the load. 12 months of frost and thaw had shifted the material some. The pile had spread and flattened, now covering closer to 35 by 45 feet. The edges were lower, maybe 8 inches. The center still ran close to 14. He picked up a handful of the crushed limestone and turned it in his palm. Clean material. Consistent sizing, not road base mix with fines and clay. This was washed, screened, graded pea gravel. The kind used for driveways and drainage beds. The kind sold by the ton at the Geneva lumber yard for $4.80 per ton, delivered. He knew that price because he had bought 2 tons of it the previous fall to resurface his own driveway. He'd hauled it himself from the Geneva yard, 2 trips in the grain truck, paid cash. He remembered the receipt because Joanne had filed it with the farm accounts. $9.60 total. 2 tons of the exact same limestone crushed to the exact same size as what was sitting on his sugar corner. He set the gravel down. He walked the perimeter of the pile a second time, slower. He estimated the depth by pushing a stick down through it at 4 points. The center, the north edge, the south edge, the east center. He recorded the depths on the back of his work glove with a grease pencil. 14 inches at center, 9 at north, 8 at south, 11 at east. He averaged those numbers in his head. He did the math at the kitchen table that evening. He also wrote down what he had lost. 2 beet seasons on 1/200 square feet of sugar corner. At his 10-year average of 21 tons per acre, a full acre would produce $554.40 gross at the going beet price. His 1/200 square feet represented 0.0275 acres. The math came to about $15.25 per season in direct lost revenue. 2 seasons, roughly $30.50 total in crop value. That was not a large number. It was not the point. The point was that the gravel had been there for 13 months. 2 growing seasons had passed. 2 more reminders had been ignored. And the material was as settled into his topsoil as if it had always been there. Gerald Foss had said the letter would cost $80. The civil action would cost several hundred more. The total legal bill to force Harlan to move material worth perhaps $48. Wholesale could easily reach $500, and a year would pass regardless. He looked at the numbers on the kitchen table. Then he looked at them from a different angle. The load, he estimated, was between 8 and 12 tons. Gravel trucks in Fillmore County at that time ran 10-ton capacity. At $4.80 per ton, 10 tons of washed pea gravel was worth $48, not a windfall. But it was sitting on his land, owned by a man who had made clear he was not coming to collect it. The problem was separation. The gravel was mixed into the top layer of soil at the edges of the pile, and the soil was mixed up into the gravel at the base of the pile. A foot of material compacted by 12 months of Nebraska winter wasn't a clean pile of rock sitting on undisturbed ground. It was an intermingled mess of limestone and some of the best topsoil in Fillmore County. A shovel wouldn't sort it. A loader would take the soil with the gravel and dump both. What he needed was a screen. His neighbor to the north was a man named Albert Japlowski. Albert ran 220 acres, mostly corn and soybeans, and had a reputation in the county for building things out of whatever was at hand. He'd fabricated a grain elevator extension from salvaged auger pipe. He'd built a hay baler attachment from an old cultivator frame. Lauren drove up to Albert's place on a Saturday morning in early April and described what he needed. Albert said he could weld a screen box in an afternoon. He had expanded steel mesh in 2 sizes in the shed. 1/4-inch openings, which would pass soil fines and hold the pea gravel, and 1/2-inch, which would pass the gravel and hold anything larger. He said Lauren wanted the 1/4-inch for this job. He said he'd build a box frame 3 feet by 4 feet with handles that Lauren could shovel material through and let the fines fall into a pile below while the gravel stayed on top. He built it in 3 hours that Saturday, charged Lauren $11 for the steel and his time. The screening started the following Monday, April 11th, 1977. Lauren worked alone with the screen box and a long-handled spade. He set the screen across 2 sawhorses over a cleared patch of ground and began at the north edge of the pile, where the material was thinnest. Shovel a load onto the screen, work it back and forth, let the soil fall through, set the gravel aside. Move 12 inches, repeat. The rhythm of it was slow. A full shovel of mixed material produced about 1/2 a shovel of clean gravel and a pile of screened soil beneath the mesh. He got faster over the first hour as he learned how hard to shake the box and at what angle. Too steep and the gravel slid before the fines cleared. Too flat and the soil clogged the mesh and had to be cleared by hand. He found the angle by feel about 15 degrees off level and kept it. He counted buckets as he worked. Each full 5-gallon bucket of screened gravel went onto the tarp. He was averaging about 4 buckets per hour of clear working time, not counting the stops to move the sawhorses, clear the mesh, or rest the back. At roughly 30 pounds of dry gravel per bucket, that was 120 pounds per hour. Not fast, but it was moving. The first hour produced one thing he hadn't anticipated. The soil coming through the screen was not degraded. 12 months under the gravel, packed tight, frozen and thawed. The soil was dark and fine and slightly moist even in April. It had been protected, in a way, from the surface freeze and crack cycle that hurt soil structure over winter. What fell through the 1/4-inch mesh onto the cleared ground was good soil, his soil, the Sugar Corner soil his father had spent 30 years improving. He kept a bucket nearby and moved the screened soil into a low pile, 8 feet clear of the working area. He worked 3 hours Monday morning, 2 more in the afternoon. He worked the same schedule Tuesday and Wednesday. By the end of Wednesday, he had cleared the north half of the pile, roughly 18 by 45 feet of the original area, and had 2 piles to show for it. One pile of clean washed gravel, approximately 4 feet across and 2 feet high, sitting on a tarp he'd spread beside the sawhorses. One pile of screened soil, darker and finer than the surrounding field surface, about 6 feet wide and 18 inches deep. His back was telling him about the work. He was 45 years old and had spent 3 days shoveling aggregate through a steel mesh. His wife, Joanne, said nothing about it at dinner Wednesday evening. She poured his coffee and left him to his thinking. Thursday, he drove to the Geneva lumber yard. He asked the man at the counter what they were paying for washed pea gravel delivered by the yard. The man said they were buying from their regular supplier at $3.90 per ton and selling for $4.80. He said they'd consider buying from an independent seller if the material was clean and consistent. Lauren brought a coffee can of gravel from the tarp pile and set it on the counter. The man looked at it, said it was clean, said it was consistent sizing, said he'd take a look at the volume and let Lauren know. He drove out to the south field with the lumberyard man that afternoon. The man looked at the pile on the tarp, estimated the volume at roughly 4 tons in hand, said he could take it at $3.90 per ton if Lauren could load it. Lauren had a front-end loader on his Farmall 560. He said he could load it. He finished screening the remainder of the pile over the following 4 days, Friday, Saturday, and the following Monday and Tuesday. The south half of the original load was deeper and more compacted. He had to break it with the spade before it would move through the screen. The soil at the base of the south section had a thin gray layer where limestone dust had filtered down and settled against the topsoil surface. He scraped that layer aside and set it away from the good soil pile. It was maybe an inch thick across an area of 15 by 20 feet. He'd deal with it separately, mix it back into the field gradually. The final tally of screened material, completed on April 19, 1977. Clean gravel, 9.4 tons by his estimate, based on the loader bucket capacity he'd used for comparison. Screened topsoil, approximately 14 cubic yards. Dark, fine, essentially undegraded. Limestone dust layer, scraped off and set aside. Roughly 2 cubic yards of pale, mixed material. He hauled the gravel to the Geneva lumber yard in 2 loader bucket loads, transferred to his grain truck. The lumberyard man weighed it at the scale. 9 tons, 200 pounds. Not his estimate of 9.4, but close. Paid at $3.90 per ton, $35.78. He drove home with $35.78 in his shirt pocket and a Southfield corner with the gravel off it. The screened soil went back onto the cleared ground. He spread it with the loader bucket and the rake, working it smooth, incorporating it into the top few inches of the surrounding field soil. The thin limestone dust layer he spread thinly across the whole area and turned under with the moldboard plow. Limestone was not a problem for beat ground. It was, in small doses, a benefit. He planted sugar beets in that corner on May 3, 1977. Same variety he'd been using since 1969. USH20, certified seed, 12 pounds per acre on the section. The soil took the seed well. He could see no difference between the sugar corner soil and the surrounding field. He did not contact Harlan Pisk again. Harlan called in June of 1977. Said he'd been meaning to get out and collect that gravel. Said he'd have a truck out by the end of the month. Lauren said the gravel had been removed. Harlan asked who'd taken it. Lauren said he'd sold it, along with his time, to cover his losses from 2 seasons of blocked ground. There was a pause on the line. Harlan said the gravel was his property. Lauren said it had been deposited on his land without permission and had sat there for 13 months. He said if Harlan wanted to discuss the matter further, he was welcome to call Gerald Foss at the county attorney's office. Harlan did not call Gerald Foss. He did not call Lauren again that year. People in the county heard about it through the normal channels: the co-op in Geneva, the grain elevator in Chicley, the farm implement dealer on Route 6, who seemed to know everything that happened within 40 miles. The version that circulated was shorter and sharper than the actual sequence of events. The version that circulated was that Lauren DeMuth had turned Harlan Piske's dumped gravel into cash and then planted his beets on top of it. That version wasn't wrong, exactly. It just skipped the 9 months of unanswered phone calls and the 2 lost beet seasons and the $80 letter Lauren had decided not to send, and the screen box welded on a Saturday for $11, and the 9 days of shovel work that had left his back stiff for 2 weeks. The story people liked was the result. Lauren understood that. He didn't correct the version that went around. The sugar beets in the corner of the south field came in that September at 22 tons per acre, right at his 10-year average. The soil showed no effect from the year of burial. The beet color was good. The sucrose content tested within normal range. He walked that corner on a September morning while Joanne drove the truck alongside the harvester. The topsoil under his boots was the same dark, yielding soil his father had described. A little more limestone in its history now. No worse for it. He thought about the Gerald Foss letter he hadn't sent. He thought about what $80 in legal fees would have bought. A letter that might have moved the gravel or might not, and either way wouldn't have put money in his pocket or his soil back in better condition. He thought about the $11 screen box, the 35 B78 from the lumber yard, the 9 days of work, and the 2 tons of good topsoil sitting back in the ground where it belonged. The math wasn't complicated. It just required looking at the problem from the right direction. The following spring, Harlan Pisk applied for a county road use permit to haul gravel on County Road F through the summer. The permit required sign-off from adjacent landowners in certain circumstances. Lauren's name was on the form. He signed it. The permit was approved. He never mentioned the Southfield corner to Harlan again. He didn't need to. Albert Chaplowski's screen box stayed in Lauren's shed for 3 years after the job was done. In 1980, a neighbor 2 miles east named Ted Rathke had a similar problem. A load of construction fill dumped near his driveway by a contractor who'd misjudged the property line. Ted needed to separate the fill from about 6 inches of topsoil it had mixed into. He borrowed the screen box for 2 weekends, said it worked well. Lauren farmed the 180 acres in Fillmore County until 1994. He retired at 62, turned the operation over to his son Mark, who had been working alongside him since 1988. Mark kept the sugar beet rotation on the south field. The sugar corner performed the same every season it was planted. Between 19 and 24 tons per acre, consistent, reliable, dark soil that gave back what you put into it. Mark had heard the gravel story growing up. He knew the corner by name before he knew the full story behind it. He still calls it the sugar corner. Still plants it last, the way Lauren did, because the soil on that section is so good and it doesn't need as much fertilizer as the rest of the field, and he doesn't want to overdo it. The screen box is still in the shed. Rust on the frame now, but the 1/4-inch mesh is intact. It's hung on 2 nails on the north wall, next to the cultivator parts and an old set of row markers Lauren welded up in 1969. $35.78 for the gravel. The soil cost nothing. It was already his. Still the best acre on the farm. Still growing.